Our next witness is witness 119, which is on page 388. And just so the panel is aware, we don't have any of the visuals for this testimony. Mr. Witness, can you hear me?
Yes, I do hear you.
Mr. Chair is going to give you an oath.
Good morning, Mr. Witness. Would you repeat after me, please? I solemnly declare that I will tell the truth,
I solemnly declare to tell the truth
and nothing but the truth.
to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
So there'll be questions now from counsel, followed by questions from the panel.
Mr. Witness, we have your statement from November 17th and November 18th, and I have noted that you are withholding details for security reasons, so please, when you're giving your testimony, do not disclose anything that would jeopardize that. If you could please tell the panel what happened and what you observed on November 17th and November 18th.
I may start from the point when on 17th of November, because of the job that I had, we were waiting to receive some material that we needed for our job. Unfortunately, the material didn't arrive. And when I went out, I saw that a large number of people are having a peaceful protest, and they are chanting slogans. Unfortunately, some individuals appeared there after a few hours. And there were 7, 8, 10 people who were trying to guide people, to lead people. And then the population increased. No clash occurred until at the entrance of Basij base, the Basijis got involved with people, had clashes with people. A group of people had burnt the base. And unfortunately, I was hit, and I got injured with a tear gas canister. And when I became conscious, I was bleeding. I went back home. The same night, I went back, and I realized that a number of people with helmets and batons were beating people. They had a commander who, from above a small room above the Basij base, was ordering people to shoot people. Despite all that, they went to the street as well. Some armed individuals were shooting people with real weapons. The story continued until a few people got injured. They fell down. Even a 16-year-old girl was hit and died in place. After that, we were forced to go to the alleys, side alleys. At that time, pellets were used. Of course, I should add that this group seemed to belong to Basij, and they were speaking Arabic language, so I may say that they were not even Iranian. they were chanting Allahu Akbar, and then they had no mercy. I cannot explain part of the thing, and I cannot also explain what happened in one of the streets. Anyway, they attacked people, an elderly man and a young girl who were just sitting in their own cars, and they were not doing anything. They were forced to get off their car, and from 1 or 2 meters, they were shot with pellets. Both of them got injured. When we as people saw this, and we were about 50 to 60 people in the alley, we could not tolerate to see such a scene. So we attacked the officers. They were forced to retreat. We took the old man and his daughter to a building. There was a doctor there, a good doctor, who took the pellets off the hand and from the behind the thigh and the knees. If you want me, I can explain further to the end, but I think I'm taking the time of the court.
Mr. Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Witness, and thank you for being here. I have a small area to ask about, and that was the attack on the Basij base, which strikes me as being somewhat extraordinary because my understanding is, obviously, of course, it's the Basij base, but there were also security forces that were stationed in the area, some on the on the roofs, and they were armed. Am I correct about that?
Yes, exactly.
And is it the case then that the protesters nonetheless attacked this base? And if that is the case, I see also that 80 to 90% of the base was burned. Can you describe how that happened?
بله بله ببینید از اونجایی که در واقع مردم خواستشون داخل اینجا نه فرمانداری داشت و نه
Well, there was no governor's office. There was no other place for people to protest against or before. So they started protesting against the Basij base. The city where I live in is a small town. The place where I live in is a small town. Therefore, there were a large number of people on the streets, and then people were chanting slogans. First, the Basijis started the clashes. They came out of their base, and they were trying to disperse people using baton and tear gas. I got injured in the same place. After they started taking action, people attacked. Of course, I do not want to say that people were necessarily involved in the burning, because I saw there was another group that were burning banks. I am 100% certain, based on what I have asked a number of people, that they were a group of individuals who had planned in advance to burn the banks, and they were not prevented from doing so. And then the clashes became more severe, and that was when the officers started shooting at people with the snipers and others. And from the Basij base, they were shooting at people. I personally saw a number of bullets had hit the doors and the walls around me. Even they can be seen in the film which I have sent to you.
if I understand your statement, though, you said that people attacked the Basij base. So this happened fairly early on. It was on the 18th of November in the morning, and the base was burned. Do you know how it was burned? Do you have information of how the fire was started?
I just explained if it has been interpreted correctly. I said that the first clash started from the side of the Basijis. They were beating people and they wanted to force people to go back home. But since people were angry and unhappy because of all the social atrocities, they couldn't resist and they retaliated. Yes, the base burnt. 80 to 90% of the base burnt. A number of the vehicles burnt, but no individual was hurt. They were inside one room and they were not hurt. And it is clear if you watch the film I've sent.
All right, maybe I can ask it this way. Were any of the protesters that you saw armed in any respect?
Yes, I could see a few individuals who had cocktail Molotovs, and they were throwing those cocktail Molotovs. But we cannot exactly say that they were ordinary people either.
What do you mean by that? We can't say they're ordinary people. Were they among the protesters as far as you knew, as far as you could tell? In other words, that they were not secure. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, see, when I say that we cannot say that from the people, I can say that we saw with our own eyes that there were a group of people comprised of several individuals who were burning banks one after the other. Therefore, I cannot really be sure that what happened to the Basij base was necessarily what the people's doing. We cannot be sure that the people did it. What we saw was that maybe the same group of people who burnt the banks may have also burnt the base too.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Justice Yacoub.
Thank you. Somebody gave evidence that banks were burned by the protesters because banks were not protected. I don't necessarily agree with that. Now, firstly, I want to know whether you said a decision was made to burn the banks. Do you think that the protesters made any decision to burn banks? And if so, why would banks be burned? And I wanted to clarify that if the decision was taken to burn petrol stations, if the decision was made to burn petrol stations, I would understand because the price of petrol had gone up. Now, why the banks is what I'm interested in, if the decision was taken.
بله ببینید دقیقاً از اونجایی که من خودم به شخص با بالای 10-20 نفر
I personally, with 10 or 20 of my friends who were present there,
سنی که اونجا بیشتر با بالای 70% از
and
آزادخوانندگانی
over 70% of the protesters over there were aged between 16 and 19. Maybe this was the reason that the clashes that occurred and the damages that were caused to banks, maybe some people spontaneously did so because of the age group of the people who were participating in the protests. But burning of the banks was carried out by the security officers because the people were acting quite peacefully. If they really wanted to burn anywhere, they would have burnt the gas stations, as you say, or other places. But when they burnt banks, instead of plastic bullets and tear gas, we saw that they used real bullets because they had the necessary excuse to use the bullets, the real bullets.
It was very helpful. Just one more question. And I want to clarify again that I am not saying that the protesters used Molotov cocktails when you saw them. I'm not saying that at all. I'm asking you a broader question for a different reason.
Yes,
What I'm asking you is this. I've read of instances where the people who don't have firearms and expensive equipment and so on have quite often used Molotov cocktails as part of their resistance. Now, would that be the case here? Would that have been the case during Iranian protests from time to time? Sorry, I wanted to finish the question. Is that the case? Did that happen? Did people in Iran use Molotov cocktails in their protests from time to time? Not on this occasion, but from time to time?
Well, see, our problem is a basic problem. Since 78, 88, 96, 98 Iranian calendar, we have had a social demand. And we did not really need to resort to violence for our social demands. I'm really surprised myself why this happened, why people were confronted in such a way. Regarding cocktail Molotov, you're right, it was also used in 1388 Iranian calendar. This is natural. This was in fact a sort of retaliation. What people did in general was that they burnt the rubbish bins in order to block the roads. I didn't see anything more than that, and cocktail Molotov I didn't see. I should also give you an explanation. At the beginning of the clashes, when they wanted to burn the banks, people, I myself, and many of the people who were there prevented a large number of banks to be burnt where there were residential complexes above them. We stopped the burning of those banks.
Question, and if you don't know the answer, please tell me. Don't say yes because I'm asking the question in a particular way, please. In my experience, am aware that security forces often do the things that protesters do so that the protesters can be blamed for things and the protesters can be blamed for more things than they actually did. Have you come across that experience at all? And if you don't know, just say so, please.
Yes, we can say yes. That is the case. Yes.
Elaborate?
بله.
Yes, if at all possible, I would like to do that.
اونجایی که حالا ما توی ایران متاسفانه با تمام
Unfortunately,
کشورهای
Iran
مختلف
is very
حتی
different
کشورهای
from the
خلیجی
Gulf,
با
Western countries,
مثلا یا
and the European
فیزیک
countries.
متفاوت
That's to say, when we say
ما
demonstrations, the
اونجا
story is very different in our country.
روز
And
بیشتر از 1500 نفر کشته
during only 2
همه
days,
حتی
1,500 people were killed.
واقعا یه
And it is
اتفاق
something that it is really a catastrophe similar to what Hitler did. We we have heard from somebody that we knew, and he or she is still there. We heard from this person that in Kurdistan, in the city of Sanandaj, more than 50 protesters were taken by those forces, and they underwater, they were choked and died, and their corpses have not been extracted from water yet. So it is almost 30 years that we have been asking for our rights. And since our demands are not pursued and they only attack us, they encounter us, it makes people rather resistant. And people were using cocktail Molotovs. I did not do that. But yes, in answer to your question, I would say that yes, the security forces would also use them too. To reciprocate, security forces are after wrapping it up, usually. But in Iran, unfortunately, it's a bit different. There is an atmosphere which is dominant. And always what they want to have is to keep that dominance. And they don't want the people to demand anything but what the dictatorship wants to do. And this is the reason why I say that our demonstrations are different from demonstrations in other parts of the world. Anybody who chants a slogan, unfortunately, is going to be labeled as fighting God, somebody who is meddling with internal security, and probably this person is going to be executed.
And where did you get the figure of 1,500 from?
This figure is a figure which was confirmed in New York Times or CNN, if I'm not mistaken. They are the ones that broadcast the news. But we think that the figure is higher. Even in this small town of mine, more than 60 to 70 people were killed. And I have the names of a number of them, but I don't want to name those names here because of security reasons. And there were also those who were severely wounded. They were taken to the dispensary and they were prevented from having treatment, and they were abducted and taken away. And from this very small town, you can infer what could have happened in other places, in other bigger places like Karaj, like Tehran, which is a very highly populated city. We received really horrifying reports.
Answer has made me ask one more question, which is how many people's names are on your list? Don't give me the names. Just tell me how many people's names do you have on your list? Do you have any idea? If not, can you count them and give them to council at some point?
Yes, at least one or two of them, they are in my statements, and there are two, three other people that I have not named in my statements because it would create security problems for those people.
Much indeed.
Hello.
And if it's all right, I would like to add something else.
واقعا
I really am grateful to you to have given me this time in order to investigate these murders, these atrocities, so that the whole world would see it. It is really a bitter experience for us. We have had very bitter days. We remember them differently. On the evening of the 27th of Aban, when I was walking on the streets after the bloody entanglements, you will not breathe if I tell you every step that I took. There was so much blood on the ground, and of course we were not in a position to take videos because every step of the way you would see security forces there, and very quickly the municipality vehicles came with their water cannons, and they cleaned the streets so that nobody could see that.
Yes, I just have a few questions. You said there was a group of people who are going around burning the banks. Is that correct?
You see, this group was not a group of ordinary people. Definitely, certainly, they were not ordinary people. Before that, we had not had any struggles with anybody. The ordinary people had not had any kind of struggles. And if there were any struggles, it were of a minor nature. But after the banks were set on fire, the special unit that was present there, they just rushed to the streets and they would beat up anybody that they would see. They would shoot people with real bullets. They were in the middle of the boulevard, and that's what they did. There is no doubt about this. It is certain. Perhaps for somebody who can look at it from a different perspective, that person would see something different. But for us who were in the demonstrations and we were looking and we were asking for our rights, it was obvious for us that those people, those individuals who were setting fire to the banks were not the ordinary people.
If you can please just answer the questions. Was this group, were their faces covered, or were their faces shown?
They had covered their faces and they had hats on.
Coverings that they used and the hats that they wore similar in nature, or were they different one to the other?
No, the coverings were different. And as far as I remember, this person was of the height of 165. He was of a small stature, but yes, he, along with his colleagues, they went and I destroyed the banks, yes.
Could you describe anything particular about the clothing that these people were wearing?
You see, the clothing that they were wearing were ordinary things. There was not anything particularly personal clothing, particular, or anything that a guard would wear or like that.
What type of equipment, for lack of a better word, did they use to burn the banks? Did they have, I don't know, explosive? Did they have gas? Could you explain a little bit?
They had levers. They had steel levers that they used, crowbars that they used.
All the same, these crowbars, did they all have crowbars?
من به شخص
I saw two of them who had these. You see, when you have aluminum frames anywhere, they are not very resilient. And if you have levers, crowbars, you can just hit them and break them. And of course, windows are no problem for them to break. And then after doing that, they would take out the documents from the bank and they would set them to fire.
And were you able to tell how old approximately the age of this group were?
Yes, in my view, between 22 and 30 years old.
Earlier that most of the protesters were between the age of 16 and 19. So this group was of a different age. Is that your testimony? Yes?
Yes, 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 yes.
Hello, Mr. Witness. My questions are quite similar to those of my learned colleague, but with regards to the burning of the base. So if you'll bear with me. You had said that it was a few individuals who had used the Molotov cocktails and that you can't say they're ordinary people. My question was, how were you able to come to that conclusion?
At the beginning of the protests, most of the people who were in the crowd were mothers, along with their children. And because the schools were closed, precisely because of what was to happen, the mothers were there present and their children, they were 10 to 15 years old. That was the first day, and I think that you have received lots of videos from this. Those were the ones in the crowd. Because of this reason, the encounter was very peaceful by ordinary people, by the protesters. But after the security forces, and in effect we can say it was the militia, the Basij, there were no police forces. Once they started beating people up, and they showed violence and then set banks to fire, I cannot confirm that those who were using their cocktail Molotovs were from ordinary people, because at the beginning of the protest, you could see from every stratum there were mothers who had come with their children. It's not logical to think that they would make cocktail Molotovs and throw them. But after the struggle became more violent and the crowd swelled, I cannot tell after that what happened. Perhaps there were also ordinary people who were using cocktail Molotovs.
Clarify that the reason I'm asking all these questions, or the reason I will be asking all these questions, is because I have not seen the video, so I'm trying to paint the picture for myself, so please bear with me. What were the individuals wearing? Were they wearing clothes that were similar to each other?
Yes, yes. They had casks on. They had anti-bullet vests on. They had goggles. They had the equipment that they had, you would see usually used by the anti-riot units. That's what they were using.
The people that were throwing the cocktail Molotovs were the same people that were wearing these clothes. Is that what you're saying? I just want to clarify.
No.
The people who were throwing the Molotov cocktails, were they dressed in specific attire?
No. No, they were not clad in a certain attire. No, they were the people themselves. No.
Were their faces
طيب.
No.
My next questions have to do with just understanding a little bit more the relationship with the Basij forces more generally in your community. Please, again, don't feel compelled to answer any questions that might reveal the identity of your community or yourself. This Basij base, is it a prominent place in your community? Is it in a prominent place in your town?
بله.
Yes.
Is it normal to see Basij forces around the town when the situation is peaceful and there are no riots?
متوجه نشدم.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question very well. Could you please ask again?
In normal day-to-day life, are the Basij forces present in your town? Do they walk around? Do they go to the shops? Do they eat in the restaurants? Are they familiar to you?
بله.
Yes. I cannot say personally, but I can tell I know one or two of them who are members of that base, who are members of that Basij base.
Is it correct for me to understand that that Basij base is quite stable in the personnel? It's not that there are personnel that are changed regularly within the base?
ببینید
You see, the number of those who were active there were 110 people. That's as far as I know. And after the protest, after the protest started, they moved the base to the end of the street, and most of their forces are settled there. I mean, you know the forces, and perhaps a number of these forces, they did not get entangled. And as far as I know, there were many of the families of these members of the Basij who prevented them from going and getting involved. I cannot tell you more than that. I mustn't.
You mentioned in your testimony earlier that you could hear them speaking in a different language to Farsi. Can you elaborate on that?
ببینید
You see, we are Iranians and we have our own language. And if somebody wants to speak in our language, but in a different dialect or a different accent, we will notice it. We could tell that there were those who were saying Allahu Akbar and shouting La ilaha illallah was not Persian, and you could tell that he's an Arab coming from Lebanon or from Palestine.
A little bit more what conclusion you are drawing from that.
ببینید
In the statement that I have given, I have talked about it in detail, but I cannot say it here now for reasons that I know I shouldn't. But I have given all the sources and I have explained what happened when these officers they rushed into the small alleys, what happened when they shot us, what happened, etc.
You're not comfortable with, but is it correct in my understanding that those who were, in your opinion, speaking Arabic with perhaps a Lebanese dialect were also Basiji forces, or were they other kinds of forces?
You see, I thought that there were more than one group. At least two groups were there. The first group that from within the base got involved, that was one group. And when that was the second day when the banks were set on fire, they came out. And I don't know whether I have mentioned it in my statements or not, that the day before they did not have any kind of equipment. At least that's what ordinary people said, and it went from ear to ear. They had only tear gas and pellets, but late at night, it seems a number of vehicles came and brought all kinds of weapons for them, and the day after, that's what they used. And I think that was a different group because I don't know whether you can get my meaning or not. As far as the Basij force is concerned, the members are those who enter the Basij force from a very young age, 15 years or so, and they train them in a special way in order that they can work for them. And many of these are very young people from 15 to 20 years of age. And you could see that. And these 15 to 20-year-olds were the same people who were coming out of the base. But the second group that we saw, they were adults. They were big people, stout men. Those are the ones who were attacking people later on, and it was not important for them at all to get involved.
And my last question, were they wearing the same clothes as the younger people, the same uniforms?
The second group, yes, they were wearing the same helmet, anti-bullet vest, special shoes, and protections. But the second group were taking the helmet off, especially those who came to the alley and shot us, took the helmet off. I also remember that he had a long beard, the one who shot at us.
So the first group and the second group wore the same clothes, but the second group removed their helmets at some point. Is that correct?
The second group, at the final hours of night, when there was martial law, we could see the second group at the night. I saw two areas, and the whole group was on the other side of the road. And I saw these two individuals who came towards us, and one of them even had clashes with people and with us. And one was just covering the other one from behind. These two individuals removed their helmets.
Mr. Witness, just follow up the question of my colleague on martial law. Yeah, when did you know that martial law was announced?
ببینید
since they filled up the alleys, they said nobody's allowed to move around, and they started shooting people. They were announcing in the alleys that nobody's allowed to go out until tomorrow morning. And I was also trapped in one of the alleys. Fortunately, I was allowed to go inside one of the buildings. I was trapped there, and I was away from my wife and children till morning. I couldn't contact anyone.
16 or 17 November?
این
It was on the 17th of November, the night of 26th of Aban, 26th of Aban at night.
Mr. Witness, I have one last question for you that relates to an issue that my colleague raised about the burning of banks. And you said something interesting, which was that the protesters were able to stop the burning of banks when there were residential units located above the banks, and you were obviously referring to people protecting the property. I am wondering if you could tell us how it was that the protesters were able to stop that. What did they do to intervene to stop the burning of banks?
ببینید
The first hours when they were going to do so, we were over 5,000 people ourselves. We realized that they wanted to take the protests to elsewhere. And a separate group, maybe 20 individuals, said that we should go from this route and burn banks. As far as we realized, they were throwing stones at the windows, and the thousands of people who were there, we quickly went there, and we didn't allow them to do so. We said that it was not right to burn banks because there might be people living above the banks. You're not allowed to do so.
How did you direct those comments when you say, we told them they shouldn't do this? Who are you looking at? Who are you talking to get that message across?
There was a group of 10 or 20 people. We were very close to that group of 10 or 20. Since we realized that what they were trying to do, we quickly went towards them and we prevented them.
And they were dressed in any kind of uniform. They had no masks. They were part of the group.
They were a group of 10 or 20 who had gathered in that place. They were a bit away from us, but after they wanted to burn what we saw, there were a group of 4 or 5 people, maybe, that were burning all the banks, one after the other. Of course, the banks have anti-fire or anti-burglary systems. None of them really led to any resistance by the police force. And this is a question for us. How did such a thing happen?
My question to you, and I hope that I'm not being confusing, is the protesters were apparently successful in stopping the burning of banks by issuing a statement to a group of 10 or 20 people. However,
No.
I'm sorry, did I?
No, just pay attention. At the beginning, when I'm referring to when people had blocked the road, there was about 8,000 people there. And after an hour or two, there were 10, 15, 20 people who came from distance. They came and they said, let's go to the entrance of the town. And from there, let's start burning probably banks. And then when we went closer, we just realized that they were burning banks.
You've answered my question.
They were not burning all banks. Parsian Bank, Agriculture Bank, and Mascan Bank were the ones that we prevented them from burning. So they did not get much damage. They did not receive much damage. They were only hit by a few stones.
But these were people who were identifiable in the sense that the crowd of people there knew who to address this subject to, who to say, please don't go burn banks. That group was identifiable.
During those days, and in that atmosphere, nobody was trying to see who is identifiable or who is not. Nobody knew who was standing where and what they were doing. And for that reason, we were just trying to stop anyone getting injured through clashes. When they were standing there, they had no helmet, no special clothes. But after they started, I'm talking about the group who were burning places. They had face coverage, and they were burning banks. And whoever tried to stop them, they tried to face them violently. You're welcome.
Mr. Witness, I have a few questions, just clarifications, if I may. Just starting at the beginning of your account, and the moment when the Basij base is burned, in your statement you say, quote, there were mostly young people aged 15 to 17 years who participated in those demonstrations. And that's in the same paragraph as your description of the Basij base being burned. But as I understand your testimony today, you're suggesting at the time the Basij base was burned, it was mainly women in the demonstrations. So I'm... Wait until I've asked the question, please. Can you just clarify what the state of your evidence is now?
What I told you, what I said was complete. At the beginning, the morning of 16th of November, that was when we had not gone there. We hadn't received the material that we wanted. One of our acquaintance with his or her son had gone close to the Basij base, and there were thousands of mothers and with their children in front of the base. They were chanting slogans in an ordinary manner. It was in the afternoon of that day. It was about 2 to 3 in the afternoon when we went there, and that was what we faced. Then we realized, yes, the majority of the population of 15, 16, up to 19, the majority were of this age.
that there for a minute. When you returned after being injured, and I'm looking again at your written statement, and I'm talking about 3:30 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And this is what you say in your statement. Slowly the officers came out. This is the Basij officers from their base. At about the same time, reinforcements were sent for them who also came out. I saw their commander on the wall of the Basij base who was shouting orders to fire at people to force them to retreat. Do you recall saying that?
Yes, yeah, I do.
I want to know what you mean by forcing the people to retreat. What were the people doing at that point?
Well, the demonstrations were one of the biggest of their kind happening in the past 30 years. Controlling the demonstrations, as far as we understood, was very difficult for them.
Mr. Witness, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm really just interested in what you saw, not opinion, really what you saw and what you heard. So what were the people doing at the time when the commander issued an order to force them to retreat?
At that moment, people, when they were firing at people, people retreated to the alleys. And they were forced to retreat. Many got injured. I don't know what exactly. What else do you want me to say? I can explain everything that I said again.
Mr. Witness, you're still not addressing my question. What were the people doing? Were they running towards the Basij commander? Were they sitting down on the floor? Were they firing, throwing stones? What were they doing? Focus on my question, please.
Yes, okay. Yes, people at that moment were attacking and were throwing stones. Maybe I didn't understand your question properly here, sorry. People were hitting the base after they created a clash themselves, the Basijis, of course. They were hitting the base with stones. They were trying to occupy the base. And after that, the commander went up and ordered the Basijis to shoot at people with true bullets. Before that, they were just hitting people, shooting at people with pellets and tear gas canisters.
Thank you. So, 3:30 to 4 p.m., the demonstrators are throwing stones and trying to enter the base. And am I correct, at this point, the commander of the base, ordered the troops, his troops, to fire at the protesters? And what was the what were the Basij doing at that point in terms of firing live ammunition or something else?
After they received the order, as you can see in the film that I sent to you, they started shooting at people. A number of people got injured there. And one individual who was standing on the boulevard, if you can see the film, I have filmed the individual. There was live bullets being shot at people. I should also say that from above the building, there were some snipers shooting, as far as we could understand. And also there was another shopping mall from the top of which people were being shot.
I'm almost finished, if you just be patient with me. At 6 p.m., when you went out again on the street, demonstrations were still continuing in front of the Basij base, or not?
One could not say. About 100 to 200 meters away from the base, people were still chanting slogans until finally people were beaten up in a brutal manner so that they would retreat. This is what happened.
In your statement, you say this, and this is in relation to 6 p.m. You describe how there's an old man with his daughter inside his car, and his car is riddled with bullets. And then you say, quote, "At that moment, we attacked them, forcing them to retreat." Can you remember giving that testimony?
Yes, exactly.
Who's we, and what's the nature of the attack? Without revealing your identity, please.
There were a number of people who had taken shelter in that alley. Maybe 15, 20 people we were, maybe less or more. It was us, the 15 or 20 people, when we saw that because one individual was shooting at them, and one individual from 5 to 6 meters away was covering that individual who was shooting. So by seeing this scene, we attacked them. We moved towards them, and they retreated. So we were able to save that old man and his daughter. They were shot, of course, with pellets.
Did you and the other 15 or 14 people who saved the man and his daughter, did you have any weapons?
No, not at all.
Thank you, Mr. Witness. I've got nothing further, and I think nothing else from the panel, Counsel.
No questions, sir.
Mr. Witness, thank you very much for testifying. We appreciate the effort you've made to describe these events to us, and we'll take into account everything that you've said. Thank you.